Good morning, all. This morning we are finishing off James 4, starting in verse 13 to the end. Read along with me. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. This is the word of the Lord.
All right, Greg's getting baptized today. Let's cheer for that. We got a lot of family up here. Welcome to Life Church. If this is your first time here, let me extend that welcome. I know you've already been welcomed, hopefully, by many others, but I'm glad you're here. Hopefully you're in James chapter 4 already. If not, go ahead and get there. My 9-year-old son, asked me today how long I was going to preach for, so I'm feeling the pressure. And I'm going to tell you what I told him. It goes faster if you take notes. So get your notepad out, and we're going to go after it. All right, so the book of James, just to refresh your memory, is a book that's all about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It was written by the brother of Jesus, younger brother of Jesus, inspired by the Spirit of Jesus to show us what it actually looks like to follow in Jesus' footsteps. The main goal of James is to help us make sure that we're living consistent lives, that we're living lives where our words match our works, that our beliefs match our actions, that our talk matches our walk, so to speak. More often than not, I would say you probably agree with me if you've been here, what James was finding 2,000 years ago, what we're finding in our own lives 2,000 years later, is that people who claim to be Christians are more often than not a bunch of hypocrites. And this is actually one of the biggest beefs that our world, our culture, our friends, our family who isn't a part of the church has with the church. It's like, well, why would I go to that church? It's a bunch of hypocrites. And you're like, you're right. That's a good point. What are we supposed to do with this? Are any of you fans of hypocrites, by the way? Like, does anybody like a hypocrite? No, of course not. Nobody likes a hypocrite. We look at people like Rousseau, I mentioned, I think a couple weeks ago. Rousseau claimed to love humanity. He was like the chief lover of humanity, and then he abandoned his 5 kids to die in an orphanage. And we're like, that's not great. Or we look at somebody like Mary Baker Eddy. She's the founder of the Christian Scientist movement. And she taught that faith healing is like the only way to get healed. So if you have an illness, you don't go to medicine, you do all of these like faith things and mind things. And yet when she got ill, she used morphine, so much so that she became addicted to morphine. And you're like, that's inconsistent. I don't really like that. I don't feel good about that. One of my favorite hypocrite philosophers, because they're all hypocrites, of all time is a guy named Henry David Thoreau. Anybody know Henry David Thoreau? Of course you do. You had to read his book in middle school. Now, if you know anything about Thoreau, Thoreau was a conservationalist, he was an environmentalist, he was an isolationist, kind of a survivalist. He lived in the wild, supposedly, and he wrote a 100,000-word memoir about him living in the wild and surviving in isolation. And he was the Bear Grylls before Bear Grylls was a thing. That's what Thoreau was all about. So today, he is known as the father of environmentalism. He's kind of become an icon for survivalists. If you're looking for something to watch on Netflix that isn't trash, because most of it's trash, there's a show on there called Alone. Yes, Alone. All right, we're together here. Caroline and I, that's our favorite show. I wish there were more seasons on there, but it's Alone before Alone. Watch it and you'll understand what I'm talking about. The only problem with Thoreau is that he was a massive hypocrite. He loved to condemn society for disrespecting nature, and yet at the same time, he started a fire in the forest that burned over half the forest. And when he was asked if he felt bad about it, he was like, no, it was actually kind of a beautiful thing. I enjoyed the spectacle. You're like, wait, what? You're supposed to not do this stuff. In fact, before he wrote his 100,000-word memoir and became the father of environmentalism, his nickname was Woods Burner. Look it up, it's true. But that's not all. While he was supposedly living in isolation for those 2 years, he was actually living on his friend's land. And he'd go into town, like on a regular basis, and he'd let people cook meals for him. And then he would take his laundry to his mom's house, drop his laundry off, and then go back into the woods in isolation. He's just a college kid. He's like, I need you to do my laundry, Mom, and then I'm going to write this book and I'm going to become really famous. Let's just be real. Nobody likes people like that. Nobody likes a guy who claims to love trees and then burns them down. He also worked in a pencil factory, by the way. Like, what irony? Anyways, nobody likes the girl who claims to believe in faith healing and then gets addicted to morphine. We admire people who actually live their values. I could totally soapbox on politicians right now. I'm not going to, so don't worry. But you all have all of them in your head, okay? We are really turned off by people who don't live their values. But the problem with hypocrites isn't the fact that there are so many of them out there. The problem with hypocrites is that, again, there are so many of them in here. And the reason that there are so many of them in here is because every single one of us is a hypocrite. Every single one of us. I love how Charles Spurgeon, the great preacher, 19th century England, once put it. He said, if I had never joined a church until I had found one that was perfect, I would have never joined one at all. And the moment I did join it, if I had found one, I would have spoiled it, for it would have not been a perfect church after I had become a member of it. Nobody's perfect. The moment you stepped foot into this room, it became less perfect. The moment that I stepped foot into this room, it became less perfect. Because we're all hypocrites. And so there is a massive problem here. We're not living perfectly consistent lives. Every single passage in the book of James, if you've been here, you know, was written to shine a light on our hypocrisy. Every single passage in this book was written to expose our hypocrisy so that we could cut it out, so that we could actually live authentic lives, so we could live our values and actually look like Jesus, so the world would look at a church and be like, wow, I've never seen people that look that much like Jesus. That's what James is all about. He was writing it for the church 2,000 years ago, so don't feel bad. You're not the first. He's writing it to us today. Now, I would argue that the kind of hypocrisy that is rampant in our churches today, like more so than any other, and we could debate this. I could be wrong about this, but I also think it is the most ignored kind of hypocrisy in our churches today is what James is going to expose in the passage that Karin just read. It was a short passage, and some of y'all were relieved. Buckle up. This hypocrisy that James is talking about is known as practical atheism. Now, practical atheism, you could call it Christian atheism. We'll call it practical atheism for the sake of the fact that I've already made the slides. Practical atheism is saying that we believe in God and then living like he doesn't exist. That's practical atheism. So Psalm 14:1 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Which is another way of saying atheism might sound really wise and it might sound really smart, but at its core, it's folly. And believers read that verse and we're like, man, that's great news. I'm not a fool. I believe in God. I'm good to go. And then we go on with our lives. We checked the box. I believe in God. But then James comes along and he says, you might not be that kind of fool, but watch out because there's a bigger kind of fool than that. And that's the kind of person who says in his heart, there is a God, but then with his life acts like there isn't one. Listen, that kind of folly is deadly. that kind of hypocrisy is fatal, because you and I were created for a specific purpose, and that purpose was to glorify God and to enjoy God, to be satisfied by God. It's actually from God that we get our identity, that we experience community, that we find our purpose, that we define morality. So John 14:6 tells us that Jesus isn't just the author of life, but he is life itself. And so there's this folly of saying, I believe in God, but I'm going to live my life how I want to without thinking of him. And the folly is that at the moment you try to detach life from the life, you lead yourself to demise, to destruction, to death. And so this kind of hypocrisy is fatal. It's deadly. It's one of the most rampant hypocrisies in the modern American church, and yet it is one of the most not talked about. And so the big question that you and I need to ask ourselves today, and I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask myself, and I've been asking it all week, is, are you a practical atheist? Are you a Christian atheist? Now, how do you know that? How do you know if you say in your heart that there's a God, but then with your lives act like there isn't one? This is the question that James wants to help us answer today. And he does so, and he does it by showing us 3 defining qualities of a practical atheist. Again, if you're taking notes, this will keep you with me for the next however long. 3 defining qualities of a practical atheist. Look at them with me, starting in verse 13. First, the practical atheist plans for the future without any thought of God. Verse 13. Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town. We'll spend a year there. We'll trade there. We'll make a profit there. And yet, we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Now, again, you read that and you're like, that was the easiest thing I've read in James so far. And Karen read it with her great accent, and we're like, this is going to be a good day. What is the big deal here? Because some of y'all are planners. Anybody a planner out there? My wife is a planner. Oh, man. Y'all are amazing. I wish I was built like you. And you read this and you're like, this person's doing a great job. He's got the time figured out. It's today or tomorrow. He's got the location locked down in such and such a town. He's got the tenure on the books. They're going to be there for a year. He's got a business strategy all laid out because they're going to trade, and he evidently has something that they're going to trade. And somehow he even knows that the end result is going to be profit. And you're looking like, this is a great guy, a great girl. Could be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. What's the big deal? What's so bad about this? The problem, though, and this is what I want you to see, is that in all of those plans, guess what there's not a single mention of? God. He's got all the plans. He's got all the details. He's got all the calendar. He's got the checklist. He's got the strategy. And God plays no part in it. It's like that old poem Invictus where the guy says, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Dead Poet Society, if you've ever watched it, you're like, that sounds so amazing. This guy is Invictus embodied. He's going to do this, and he's going to do that, and he's going to go here, and he's going to go there, and he's going to run his business, and he's going to live his life as if he's in control. He's at the wheel. He's the one setting the course for his life. Anybody live like that? While we might look at this on the surface and call it great ability, James looks at this and he calls it great arrogance. It's not inspirational, it's actually delusional. So look back at verse 15. He says, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. It reminds me of Napoleon Bonaparte right before he was about to invade Russia. His friend came up to him and he was like, listen, I really don't think we should invade Russia. And he was trying to convince him not to do it. And so he dropped that famous line. He said, man proposes, but God disposes. It's very catchy. And he thought that was going to persuade Napoleon, and Napoleon wasn't buying it. He had totally bought into his own hype. And so he looked at his friend and he said, no, I propose and I dispose. And so success is the only possible outcome. And so he invades Russia, and it's the beginning of the end for Napoleon. Guys, real faith, and I want you to hear this, this is vital. Real faith is not demonstrated by self-reliance. Real faith is demonstrated by submissive obedience. So if you're making plans and you're running your business and you're living your life and you're the master of your own destiny and you have the ability to control your future, you're actually demonstrating that there's a disconnect between what you say you believe and what you really believe. Not just about God, but about the world that you live in. You say in your heart that there's a God, but you plan for the future as if there isn't one. Living like a practical atheist. Proverbs 16:9 put it this way: a man's heart plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Proverbs 19, many plans are in man's heart, but the purpose of the Lord will prevail. Again, man proposes, God disposes. Do you believe that? Then Proverbs 3 says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all of your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. That's what real faith looks like. Real faith acknowledges that God is in control, and then it talks that way. If the Lord wills, it's going to happen. It prays that way. If this is your will, do what you want. It lives that way. I'm going to plan. I'm going to work at the details and not be like loose with the money and the time and the talent that God's given me. It's good to plan, but listen, God, you're in control. You're driving this ship. Everything you do is acknowledging him and asking him to direct you. It's not so much about growing in our ability to direct our own lives. It's about growing in our dependence on God to direct them for us. That's what real faith looks like. It isn't arrogant self-reliance. It's humble submission. So let me ask you again. What is your 5-year plan? And then the important question is, how did you arrive at that 5-year plan? How'd you get where you got? Some of you aren't planners. You're like, I don't even plan. just winging it, man. Did God's word inform your 5-year plan at all? Like, was it even a thought? Did his wisdom guide it? Did his kingdom motivate it? Did his mission drive it? Here's one. Is his power required for it? Or can you do it on your own? Are you the master of your own fate? Are you the captain of your own soul? Guys, so many Christians plan their lives on earth as if earth is their final destination. And so they settle for American dreams. And they settle for American goals and American fantasies of luxury and comfort and pleasure and ease. Go to college, get a good job, marry someone nice, have a few kids, buy a house, save up for retirement, buy another house at the beach, and then retire and spend the rest of your life playing golf and picking up seashells. That's it. That is the best that this planet can give us. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not good enough. That dream is not good enough. It doesn't satisfy. It doesn't fulfill. It actually doesn't lead to happiness, not just in this life, but for all eternity. And so the New Testament authors are constantly trying to direct our eyes away from these insignificant dreams and plan our lives around something that actually matters. So what's your 5-year plan? Something that's bigger than you, something that you can't do on your own, something that's going to require some sort of supernatural divine working through you, that's going to last beyond you, that we'll be talking about for hundreds of years and thousands of years and tens of thousands of years because it's going to last for all eternity. Is that your plan? Wonderful if that's your plan, because that's what you were made for. Don't settle for American dreams that won't last and won't satisfy. I think about a guy like William Booth. Man, William Booth, he had a plan for his life. At the age of 15, William Booth wrote in his journal, God will have all of William Booth. 15 years old. Man, at 16, I just got saved. I didn't say anything like that for years, okay? This guy's 15. At 20, he had a 6-step plan for his life, for every day of his life, and it was gonna develop and it was gonna evolve over the years. I'm gonna show you this 6-year plan. He said, 1, I will rise every morning sufficiently early and have a few minutes, no less than 5, in private prayer. That actually sounds hard when you have kids. You're like, sufficiently early. Like, I'm already waking up way too early as it is. I'm going to wake up early enough that I get a little bit of time before my kids wake up so I can talk to God. That's how I'm starting the day. That's step one. Step two, avoid all of the babbling and idle talk in which I have lately so sinfully indulged. I love that one. I think we were all there like 3 weeks ago. I think the last 3 weeks have been the least amount of slander and gossip in this church, like in the last 4 years. Praise be to God. I preached on the tongue. If you were here, you know. Number 3, endeavor to conduct myself as humble, meek, and a zealous follower of the bleeding Lamb, and by serious conversation and warning endeavor to lead others to think of their immortal souls. That's step 3. Step 4, read no less than 4 chapters in God's word every day. Step 5, strive to live closer to God and to seek after holiness of heart and leave providential events with God. Wow. Let God control the world. Let God control my life. Let God direct it. Leave providential events with God. Finally, number 6, read this over every day or at least twice a week. He knows himself, you know. He's shooting for every day and he's like, okay, let's go with like 2 out of 7. At least twice a week. God help me. Enable me to cultivate a spirit of self-denial and to yield myself a prisoner of love to the Redeemer of the world. Guys, that is how a believer plans his life. That's how a believer plans her life. And get this, the reason that I'm talking about William Booth right now, today, is because not that he achieved the American dream, not that he got super rich and played golf, for 20 years in his retirement. It's because God actually empowered him and equipped him and enabled him to carry out his plan. And the world has never looked the same. Do you know who William Booth is? He started an organization that would serve the poor in a holistic way, not just physically, giving them food, but emotionally and relationally and socially, and most importantly, spiritually. Organization grew so much that as of today, the Salvation Army is on 5 continents and 132 countries, is currently serving 4 million people around the world. That's right now. Because this guy planned his life and he said, listen, I'm going to walk with Jesus. I'm going to think about Jesus every single morning. He's going to direct my life. I'm letting him control everything and drive everything. And he's going to do something through me that I could not do in my own capacity. He's going to do something through me that I could not do in my own strength. And for all eternity, it will be his glory and it will be mine. And the world has not looked the same. Charlotte does not look the same today as it would have without the Salvation Army. And what James is saying is, you should want a dream like that for your life. Don't settle for golf and seashells. I love how John Piper put it, and this changed my life in college. Because I read his book, Don't Waste Your Life. And I was reading his book, and it was all about the American dream. And I'm like, well, that's what I want. And he's like, there's something better for you, and my life hasn't looked the same. And I pray, by God's grace, through his power, that one day in heaven I'll have stories to tell. I've already got them, though, by the way. You're one of those stories. Look what God's doing. Look what God has done. In spite of me, through me, yes, but not because of my power, not because of my strength, but because of his. I want your story to be like that. He wants your story to be like that. For his glory and for yours for all eternity. We should not be content to just go through the motions. Your 5-year plan stinks if God isn't driving it. I'm just being honest with you. It stinks. It's not going to satisfy you. Man, money is an empty goal. If God gives you money, that's amazing. Oh, if you're an incredible businessman or businesswoman, or you're just like a tech genius or whatever, like you're an engineer, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're making money, praise be to God. That is not the end goal, though. And God wants you to have a bigger dream for your life than the American one. All right, let me ask you this. If you were letting God direct your life, if you were letting him drive your plan, what would you do with your time? what would you do differently with your time? What would you do with your day? What do you think he could accomplish through you with the small gifts that we have? Each of us have small gifts, right? What do you think he could accomplish? What could he achieve with your treasure? Practical atheists plan as if there's no God, but followers of Jesus have him at the center, and he drives everything. That's the first thing James wants us to see. Second, practical atheists live as if there's always a tomorrow. Verse 14. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little time and then it vanishes. Now, basically what James is saying here is that practical atheists have so much confidence in their own ability to control their lives that they live as if tomorrow's a guarantee. It's just going to be there. Nothing could be further from the truth, though. 1 Chronicles 29 puts it like this. We are strangers and we're foreigners, as all of our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like a shadow, and there is no abiding. Psalm 103, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it, and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. Guys, the story of Scripture, the story of humanity is that our lives are short, our futures are uncertain, and the sobering reality is that you and I are not guaranteed another day. You all have had loved ones pass recently. I mean, I think 2020 taught us this even more so. I was reminded of this personally a few years ago. I was stung by a yellow jacket, and I actually almost died in the Lowe's parking lot. I had no idea I was allergic to yellow jackets. In fact, I had been stung not just many times throughout my life. I had been stung 2 weeks earlier. I was mowing my lawn. I made a nest mad because they're always in the ground. The yellow jacket stung me, didn't do anything. I drove to Lowe's. I bought hornet spray. I went back to that nest. I sprayed the hornets, and I kept mowing the lawn. No big deal. 2 weeks later, I'm mowing the lawn again. Evidently, I didn't kill the whole nest, so this nest is mad again. They sting me again, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going back to Lowe's. I'm going to get the hornet spray. And as I'm driving to Lowe's, I feel this warm, tingly sensation in my face. And I'm like, I'm having some type of reaction. And so I get to Lowe's, I call Caroline, and I'm like, hey, I think I'm having an allergic reaction. I'm going to drive myself to urgent care. And she's like, do not drive yourself to urgent care. I'm coming. I will drive you there. Wait for me. And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting in my car, just waiting. Hazards are on in my car. And all of a sudden, my face starts to feel really weird. Like the warm, tingly sensation has gone to why does my head feel like a raisin? And so I pull out my phone and I turn the camera app on so I can look at myself. And as soon as I see myself, I take a picture and I call 911 because this is what I saw. So immediately very concerned. It's like Benjamin Button. This is what I'm going to look like in my 80s. That's not a filter. Later on, I posted it on Instagram, and nobody liked it. They're like, what's this random filter that Ben's posting? I was like, wow, that's real. So I call 911. By this point, it's going quickly at this point. I've dropped my phone. I have no strength. My head's on the steering wheel, and I'm talking to 911 through the speaker, which is also the providence of God because it wasn't my car, because my car was totaled, and I was borrowing someone's car. And they just so happened to have this Bluetooth technology that I could talk to someone without holding my phone because I didn't have a car like that. And so that's the providence of God. And so I tell them what my car looks like. I tell them where I am in the parking lot, and then I pass out. So I'm done. And you're only supposed to get 5 minutes with anaphylactic shock. And I don't know how long I was out. It had to be way more than 5 minutes. Maybe it was more than that since this was my first episode. Maybe I was like, I don't know. God knows what he's doing. So 2 EpiPens later and 2 nights in the hospital later, I was alive and I was able to post it on Instagram. And that was the most important thing. Guys, I was 30 years old at the time, prime of my life, mowing my lawn. I wasn't thinking about death at all. It wasn't on my radar. I don't even know what I was thinking about at that time. I thought I knew what the day would bring, but I realized very quickly I knew nothing. And you don't either. Proverbs 27:1, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. You have no idea what's happening tomorrow. I think the last 2 years, again, have taught us this lesson over and over and over again. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is certain. Our lives are a mist. They appear for a little time, and then they vanish. And that little time might come to an end today. You are not guaranteed another one. Practical atheists live their lives as if time is always on their side. I always have tomorrow. So they say today or tomorrow I'll go to such and such a city. I'll stay there for a year. I'll build, I'll sell, and I'll get gain. Not only do they not think about the sovereignty of God, but they don't think about the uncertainty and brevity of their lives either. How many of you are saying right now, and I'm so glad you're here, but I'm going to challenge you. How many of you are saying right now, or you have said, you know what, I think I should follow Jesus, but I want to do my own thing for just a little bit longer. Like I'm only 23, you know? I'm only 24, I'm only 25. That was really loud, that was cool. I want to follow Jesus, but maybe tomorrow. I'll get serious about the Lord, but only after I have just like a little bit more fun first. I mean, I just moved to Charlotte. I'm in South End. It's like the most fun place in North Carolina to live. Like, I gotta have just a little bit more fun. I know that real believers prove their faith with their lives, but I've got too many other goals right now. Maybe when I have kids, then I'll settle down. You think tomorrow's guaranteed. You act like you control time. Maybe tomorrow I'll go to that city, I'll live there for a year, and then I'll do this thing, and I'm going to get some gain. Guys, you don't control anything. That's what James is talking about here. Stop putting off building the kingdom of God so that you can build your own little empire. Today is all you have. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. This is meant to be a wake-up call. That leads to the final thing that James wants us to see. Practical atheists obey whenever they think it's convenient. Look at verse 17. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So practical atheists say, I believe in God, but then when they're all alone and no one's there, no one's watching, they live like he doesn't exist. They become atheists in their minds in that moment. They have to. That is the only logical explanation for sin. It's the only logical explanation for rebellion and disobedience. You know the right thing, and in order for you to not do the right thing and to do whatever you want, you've got to convince yourself for a moment God's not there. Or at least God doesn't care. Every single time, this is what we have to do. And so, practical atheists know what God's sexual ethic is. They know that he values purity. They know that if we're going to live in his vision of flourishing, if we're going to experience his version of the good life, then we're going to be pure and we're going to be holy and we're going to enjoy sex in the way that he designed it to be enjoyed. That's what we know, that's what we believe. And then as soon as we're alone, just log onto a computer and indulge. You become an atheist in that moment. God's not there or God doesn't care. You have to. How else do you explain it? Tune into your favorite shows on Netflix that's, it's not straight up pornography, but man, every single episode's about sex. They laugh at it, they minimize it, they downplay it, they tell lies about it. This is what the good life looks like. This is what good sex looks like, and you just take it in. This is great stuff. Love it. You make yourself an atheist in that moment. We believe in God, but we revel in gossip. We believe in God, but we chase luxury. We believe in God, but we lie and we steal and we cheat and we covet things we would never dream of doing if our mom was in the room, right? That's how you know. Man, when I was in high school, I loved Robin Hood Men in Tights. Absolutely one of my favorite movies ever. You've never seen it. It's old. I'm old. So Robin Hood Men in Tights was a spoof off of every Robin Hood movie ever made. Now, I was a huge Robin Hood fan, like diehard Robin Hood fan. I have seen every Robin Hood ever made. It's not an exaggeration. So I got all of the inside jokes of Robin Hood Men in Tights that nobody would have ever gotten because they're just ripping off of all these movies that were made in the 50s and the 40s and shows from the 20s and all this kind of stuff. One of the funniest movies ever made. So I remember one time I was in high school and I'm in the TV room and I'm watching Robin Hood Men in Tights and my mom walks in the room and she's like, "What are you watching?" And I was like, "This is Robin Hood Men in Tights. It's one of the funniest movies ever made." And she's like, "Oh, great." And so she sits down on the couch and she starts watching this movie with me. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I start to sweat profusely because I realized that a lot of the stuff that I laughed at was really inappropriate and not okay at all. And I only became aware of it the moment my mom walked into the room. Okay, so there's a problem there, right? There's a problem there. You're all the same as me. Don't judge me. There are things that you would never dream of doing if your mom was in the room with you because you're hypersensitive to everything. You're aware of everything. You pay attention. "Oh, I wonder if this would offend her. I hope this doesn't offend her. Oh man, I don't want her to think less of me. Oh man, I can't believe I laughed at that joke. That's really disrespectful." All these kinds of things. Guys, we don't even, the thought doesn't come into our mind when it comes to God. And so we make ourselves atheists. We act, we live, we talk, we look, we watch as if he's not with us, as if he's not in us. We obey whenever it's convenient, whenever we want to. We know the right thing, but we fail to do it because God is just an idea in our heads rather than the reality of our lives. Here's the thing. Hebrews 10:26 puts it this way. If we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. This isn't talking about stumbling. This isn't talking about struggling. This isn't talking about actually trying to kill your flesh. It says deliberately. If you go on sinning deliberately, even if you know the right thing, there is no more forgiveness for sins. And what that means is you are showing you're not a Christian. You're proving that with your life. There no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but listen, a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. In other words, the end result of living as if there isn't a God is standing before him and facing the fury of his judgment. This kind of hypocrisy is the most fatal kind because you can fool yourself into thinking that you're good with God by saying you believe. But if you keep on deliberately sinning, you are showing that you are not good with God, and more importantly, he is not good with you. And it's fatal. We presume upon the mercy of God. We presume upon the grace of God. I'll never forget this guy I'd been meeting with for several months when I was a college pastor in Cary before we moved here. And his name was Chris, and he was a great guy. He was actually not in the college ministry. He was older, and so he was a working guy. But somehow, I can't even remember how we met. And we started meeting. He was like, "Hey, I'd love to meet with you once a week." And so I started meeting with Chris once a week, and we did this for months. And Chris was the kind of guy who knew all of the right things. And he'd meet with me on like a Wednesday, and he would talk with me, and I'd talk with him. But then like the moment he left, he would do whatever he wanted to do. And Chris did everything under the sun, like many of you who were saved out of South End, like some of you still today. Everything you could imagine under the sun, all of the pleasures the world had to offer, from gambling to drugs to girls to booze, like you just name it. He did everything he wanted to do because he was looking for satisfaction like all of us are. He just wanted to be happy. And so every single week he'd come into my office and we'd talk. And he'd confess all of this stuff, and I would pray over him, and then I'd open up the Bible, and I would show him what Jesus says, and I'd show him what the apostles say, and I would encourage him to obey. I would encourage him to walk with the Spirit, and then he'd leave, and he'd do everything he wanted to do. He wouldn't give any of it up. So finally, after several months of this, I took him to Hebrews 10, that passage I just read for you. Hebrews 10, and I read this passage over Chris that I just read over you. And I looked at him and I said, listen, Chris, I love you and I care about you and I want you to know Jesus and I want you to experience and enjoy life in him, but I can't meet with you anymore in good conscience because every time I tell you something and you hear the truth, you know the truth. And if you don't obey the truth, if you deliberately rebel against this thing that you know now, you're condemning yourself even more. And I can't do this in good conscience. Every time I tell you something, I know you're not going to obey it, so I'm just condemning you even more. And so I can't meet with you anymore. So we had this long conversation. Wasn't good. He was soothing his conscience by coming and talking to a pastor once a week. He was soothing his conscience by just confessing everything. I mean, I'll give him that. He was honest. Like, he wasn't lying. He was soothing his conscience. He's getting everything off of his chest, and then he would leave and be like, oh, that was good. It's like I just went and confessed to the priest. Now I can go do whatever I want again. When in reality, he was just damning his soul. And so I had to tell him, Chris, I love you, and because I love you, I can't meet with you anymore. And he left, and I never saw him again. Probably a year later, maybe 2 years later, numbers are not great in my head. I got an email, and it was from Chris, and it was a long email, and I don't like long emails. And I was like, oh no, I don't know what's in this email, and it's long, and but I'll read it. So I read it, and this one was an exception. This was a good long email. He said, Ben, I wanted to send you an update. I'll give you a nutshell. Wanted to give you an update on my life since we last talked. He said, when I left that office 2 years ago, I was so mad at you. He said, I was so mad. I swore all the way out of the church, and I vowed to never step foot in a church again. I was so mad at you. But I wanted you to know that your words are like a stone in my shoe, and I couldn't get it out. And I wanted you to know that 6 months ago, I finally surrendered. 6 months ago, I finally gave Jesus my life. I moved to Texas. I've got a great job, but more importantly, I'm a new man. And I just wanted you to know. I haven't seen Chris in years. Man, but one day I'm going to see him. One day I'm going to see him. I tell you that story because I know that some of you have never heard this before in your lives, and it's very offensive. And you think I'm being mean. And you think I'm being unkind. And you think I'm being unloving. And what I'm trying to show you right now is that if I held this back from you, if I really believed that this was true and I saw you just doing whatever you want, thinking that you were good with God, thinking that he was on your side, thinking that he doesn't care if you obey him or not, if I saw that and I didn't tell you this stuff, that would be the most unloving and unkind thing I could ever do. How could I do that to you? I think the best way I can explain what I'm talking about is to think about the Titanic. You know the story. I won't belabor it. Over 1,500 people died as the ship that not even God could sink hit the iceberg, plunged into the abyss. But the thing about the Titanic that most people don't know is that even though 20 lifeboats were lowered into the water, most of them weren't filled to capacity. And most of them were only filled up halfway. There were lots of seats left on these boats. So 711 people were rescued in these boats, but 40% of the available spaces were left unfilled. 40%. I tried to do the math. I came up with a number. I think that means 426 people. If you're a math whiz, you can correct me later. 426 people who could have been saved that night weren't. And so the big question is, why weren't those lifeboats filled to capacity? And that's what all of the researchers came together to try to figure out. And what they found was that there were two reasons. The first reason that they weren't filled to capacity was, one, bad information. The crew believed that if they filled those lifeboats up to capacity, that the boats would snap in two on their way down to the water. And so they only filled them up halfway. It was bad information. It was wrong information. If they had known the truth, they would have put 400 plus people in those boats. The second reason that the boats weren't filled, though, was because many of the passengers actually thought they were going to be okay. And so the first reason was that the crew members were holding people back because of bad information. The second reason was that people weren't even trying to get into the boats because of misplaced confidence. In fact, almost till the very end, the band was playing and the people were dancing, convinced that the ship that could not be sunk would not sink, least of all by a little iceberg. And so they played and they danced and they ate and they drank. The end was already sealed. Bad information and misplaced confidence caused 426 people to die that night. And they didn't have to die. Guys, this is what's going on in our world right now. This is what's going on in our churches right now. People are getting bad information. Like bad information. From people claiming to open up the Word of God and say what God says. They're getting bad information. That you can be good with God, but never believe in Him and receive Him and repent from your sin and turn from Him, and you can still be good with God, and He's still going to bless you, and you can still call Him friend and live the American dream. That is bad information. It is nowhere in the New Testament. People have misplaced confidence in where they stand before God. Guys, the ship of your life is going down. It might be today. It might be tomorrow. It might be in a few years, but it's going down. And if you don't hear this truth, and if you don't believe this truth, and if you don't receive this truth, guys, if you don't repent of your sin and turn to God, your end is already sealed. And you need to hear this, as uncomfortable as it is today. I love you and I care about you and I want you to live, and so I give you this message. I plead with you to receive it. Hebrews 10 again, if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Today, for some of you, needs to be the day that you fall on the mercy of God. Today needs to be the day for some of you that you fall on the grace of God. That you become one of those people that Jesus talked about in Matthew 5, the kind of people that mourns over their sin, because those who mourn over their sin will be satisfied. Maybe today, for the first time ever, you need to be the person who realizes you are spiritually bankrupt, that you are destitute before a holy God, and you need to ask Him to save you and rescue you. Today, for some of you, needs to be the day that you realize you don't have a righteousness that can ever please God, and so you need a righteousness from someone else so that you can get there, and you need to accept Christ's righteousness. That He obeyed God in every way you couldn't obey God, and then He became every sin you've ever committed so that His righteousness could be your righteousness. You need to believe that today. Your days are numbered. The ship is going down. But John 1 says He came to His own. And to those who received Him and who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God. Man, I want to close with this. I loved that passage that Bobby read over us at the beginning of our gathering, and I'm going to read it again because it's so fitting. Would you stand? Would you bow your head with me? You can hold out your hands to receive this as I read it over you. and then I'll invite you to pray. I'm just going to read this, and I'm going to stop reading, and I'm going to invite you to pray where you are and respond to the Lord. And then we'll sing, and then we'll baptize Greg. Bow your heads, close your eyes, hold out your hands, ready to receive. The Lord has taken away the judgments against you. He has cleared away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You shall never again fear evil. On that day, it'll be said of Jerusalem, fear not, O Zion. Let not your hands grow weak. The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing. I will gather those of you who mourn for the festival so that you will no longer suffer reproach. Behold, at that time I will deal with all your oppressors. And I will save the lame, and I will gather the outcast, and I will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. Thanks be to God. So would you pray and respond? And then we'll sing together after we go to the table.